All right, chapter 5. Welcome to Nevermoor. Hopefully you guys can see that. Spring of 1. They landed with a thud. Outside the arachnopod, a thick white mist enveloped them. All was quiet and still, as if the chaos of Jackalophax's town square had simply ceased to exist. Morgan felt sick. Was this, finally, her death? Had they died and crossed over to the better place? Taking stock of how she felt, Morgan thought this was unlikely. Her ears were ringing. She was nauseated, and the cut on her palm still throbbed, crusted in a smear of blood. She peered out the window into the fog. There was no divine thing waiting with open arms, no choir of angel kind to greet them. Wherever they were, it wasn't the better place. But it definitely isn't Jackalophax, Morgan thought. She heard a soft groan and turned to see Jupiter pushing himself out of the pilot's seat with a pained grimace. Sorry, not as smooth as I had hoped. You all right? I think so. Morgan took a deep, calming breath and looked around, trying to shake the hunt of smoke and shadow from her brain. Where are we? What's all this fog? Jupiter rolled his eyes. Dramatic, isn't it? Border control, he said apologetically, as if that explained everything. Morgan opened her mouth to ask what he meant, but was interrupted by a buzzing, cracking sound that reverberated inside Octavia's walls. State your name and affiliation, boomed an official-sounding voice, amplified through a speaker that Morgan couldn't see. It seemed to come from everywhere. Jupiter picked up a small device from the control deck and spoke into it. Yes, hello, Captain Jupiter, north of the Wondrous Society, the League of Explorers, and the Federation of Nevermorian Hotelers, and Miss Morgan Crow of... No affiliation yet. He winked at Morgan, and she gave a small, nervous smile in return. A mechanical whirring sound sounded around them. Outside the window, a giant eye, bigger than Jupiter's whole head, emerged from the white fog on a long mechanical arm. It blinked in at them, looking left to right and up and down, examining everything inside. You've entered from the 7th pocket of the Free State through the Mount Florian Gateway. Is that correct? Bellowed the disembodied voice. Morgan flinched. Correct, Jupiter said into the little silver microphone. Did you have permission to travel to the 7th pocket? I did, yes. Scholastic diplomacy visa, said Jupiter. He cleared his throat and flashed a look of warning at Miss Morgan. And Miss Crow is a resident of Barclaytown in the 7th pocket. Miss Crow has never heard of Barclaytown in the 7th pocket, thought Morgan. She watched Jupiter with fascination and mounting anxiety. Mount Florian Gateway? Scholastic diplomacy visa? It was all nonsense. Her heartbeat sounded loud in her ears, loud enough to fill the arachnopod, but Jupiter was unruffled. He answered the border guard's questions with a gracious calm merrily lying through his teeth. Does she have permission to enter the 1st pocket? Of course, Jupiter said smoothly. Educational residency visa. Prepare your papers. Present your papers. Papers? Jupiter's confidence faltered. Right, of course, papers. Forgot about the papers. Hang on, I'm sure I've got something. Morgan held her breath as Jupiter fumbled through different compartments on the control deck, finally producing an empty chocolate bar wrapper and used tissue. Smiling placidly at Morgan, he pressed them up against the glass for the giant eye to examine, like an actual madman. The moment stretched out in silence, and Morgan braced herself for sirens, klaxon, armed guards breaking down the arachnopod's doors. The microphone cracked and buzzed. The voice on either end heaved a long, suffering sigh and whispered, Honestly, you're not even trying. Sorry, it's all I could find, whispered Jupiter in return, looking into the giant eye and shrugging contritely. Finally, the voice boomed, You may proceed. Marvelous, said Jupiter, strapping himself into the old leather seat again. Morgan let out the breath she'd been holding. Cheers, Phil. Oh, for goodness sake. There was a muffled sound from the speakers and a squeal of feedback as though the microphone had been dropped, and the voice whispered, North, I've told you not to use my first name when I'm on duty. Sorry, give Maisie my love. Drop round for dinner next week. You can give it to her yourself. We'll do Raja Rara. Jupiter clipped the silver microphone back into his stand and turned to Morgan. Welcome to Nevermoor. The mist cleared, revealing an enormous stone archway with silver gates that shimmered from heat like a stovetop. Nevermoor. Morgan rolled the word around in her mind. She had seen it only once before in her bid letter from the Wondrous Society. It had meant nothing to her at the time, just a nonsense word. She liked the way it sounded, like a secret, a word that somehow belonged only to her. Jupiter put Octavia into gear as he read from the screen displaying notices. Local time 6:13 a.m. on the first day of Morningtide, spring of 1/3 age of the aristocrats. Weather, chilly, but clear skies. Overall city mood, optimistic, sleepy, slightly drunk. The gates groaned open and the arachnopods shuddered to life. Morgan breathed deeply as they entered the city. Having never been outside the town of Jackalafax, she was unprepared for what lay beyond the gates. Into the Jackalafax, everything had been neat and orderly and normal. Homes sat side by side in uniformed rows, identical brick houses on straight, clean streets, one after another. After the first neighborhood in Jackalafax had been built 150 years earlier, subsequent boroughs were all built, if not precisely in the same style, similar enough that if one were looking at Jackalafax from above, one might guess the entire town was designed by a sole miserable architect who hated his or her life. Nevermoor was no Jackalafax. We're in the south, said Jupiter, pointing at a map of Nevermoor on the screen of his control panel. The arachnopods scuttled low through the darkened, mostly quiet streets, dodging the old pedestrian here and there. Evidence of the night's Eventide celebrations were strewn around the darkened streets. Balloons and streamers littered front yards and lampposts, and early morning street sweepers collected discarded bottles and huge metal bins. Some people were still celebrating in the bluish pre-dawn light, including a group of young men crooning on the poignant morning-time refrain as they stumbled out of a pub. "Oh, be is not weary, friend of mine. We're while sailing over the tides of time. Pete, you're flat. No, stop singing, you're flat. The new age greets us at the shore, just like the olden age before." No, it goes down at the end, not up. Octavia sped through the cobbled webs and narrow alleys and sweeping boulevards, some neat and old-fashioned and others flamboyantly hectic. They floated through a borough just like Ogden on Juro that looked like it was sinking. The streets that were made of water and people rowed little boats through swirling mists that rose around them. Everywhere Morgan looked, they were rolling green parks and tiny church gardens, cemeteries and courtyards and fountains and statues, illuminated by warm yellow gas lights and the occasional rogue firework. She was up out of her seat, moving to the window, pressing her face to the glass as she tried to take it all in. She wished she had a camera. She wished she could jump out of the arachnopod and run through the streets. "Check that screen for me," said Jupiter, gesturing with his head as he steered Octavia through a mess of the back streets. "What time is sunrise?" "It says 6:36. We're running late. Show me some speed, Ossie," Jupiter muttered, and the arachnopod's engine roared. "Where are we?" said Morgan. Jupiter laughed. "Have you been asleep? We're in Nevermoor, dear heart." "Yes, but where is Nevermoor?" "In the Free State." Morgan frowned. "Which one's the Free State?" There were 4 states that made up the Republic. Southlight, Prosper, Far East Sang, and of course, the great Wolfacre, outside of which Morgan had never ventured. "This one," he said, steering Octavia into a side street. "The Free State is the Free State. That's the one that's actually free. State number 5, the one your tutors never taught you about because they didn't know about it themselves. We're not technically part of the Republic." He wiggled his eyebrows at her. "You can't get in without an invitation." "Is that why the hunt and smoke shadow stopped at the tower clock?" "The clock tower?" she asked, returning to the passenger seat. "Because they didn't have an invitation?" "Yeah," he said, "basically." She watched his face closely. Could they follow us here?" "You're safe, Morgan." He kept his gaze on the road. "I promise." Morgan's excitement faltered. She'd just seen him lie so skillfully to the border guard, and it wasn't lost on her that he hadn't probably answered her question. But very little about this strange night made sense. A shadow of questions swirled in her head, and all she could do was try to grab at them as they flew by. How? Morgan blinked. I don't understand. I was supposed to die on eventide. No, to be precise, you were supposed to die at midnight on eventide. He slammed his foot on the brakes, waited for a cat to cross the road, and then hit the accelerator hard. Morgan clutched the sides of her chair, her fingers turning white. But there was no midnight on eventide. Not for you. Nevermoor is about 9 hours ahead of Jackaloflax, so you skipped right past midnight. Out of one time zone and into another. You cheated death. Well done. Hungry? Morgan shook her head. The hunt of smoke and shadow. Why were they chasing us? They weren't chasing us. They were chasing you. And they weren't chasing you. They were hunting you. They hunt all cursed children. That's how cursed children die. Good grief, I'm famished. Wish we had time to stop for breakfast. Morgan's mouth had gone dry. They hunt children? They hunt cursed children. I suppose you could call them specialists. But why? The tornado in her head gained speed. And who sends them? And if the curse says I'm supposed to die at midnight, I could murder a bacon sandwich. Then why did they come early? Haven't the foggiest. Jupiter's voice was light and his face was troubled. He switched gears to navigate through a narrow, cobbled street. Perhaps they had a party to get to. Must be rubbish having to work on eventide. I know what you're thinking, said Jupiter, as they locked up Octavia into a private parking garage. He pulled a chain next to the vast rolling door, and it descended. The air was frosty, turning their breath to clouds of steam. Nevermoor, it's so great. If it's so great, why haven't you heard of it? Truth is, Morgan, this is the best place in all the unnamed realm. He paused to slip out of his tailored blue overcoat and drape it around Morgan's shoulders. It was much too long for her, and her arms didn't quite reach the end of his sleeves, but she hugged it close, revealing its warmth. Jupiter ran one hand through his wilting, coppery updo, and taking Morgan's hand with the other, led her along the chilly streets as the sky began to lighten. We've got great architecture, he continued. Lovely restaurants, reasonably reliable public transportation. The climate's great. Cold in winter, not cold and not winter. Much as you'd expect. Oh, and the beaches. The beaches, he looked thoughtful. The beaches are lousy, actually, but you can't have everything. Morgan struggled to keep up, not just with Jupiter's rapid-fire monologue, but also with his long, skinny legs, which were half skipping, half running down a street sign posted Humdinger Avenue. Sorry, he said, half hobbling, half limping, and the cramp that was beginning to seize her calf. Could we slow down a bit? Can't, it's almost time. Time for what? You'll see. Where was I? Beaches? Lousy. But if you want entertainment, we got the Trolloceum. You'll love that. If you love violence, troll fights every Saturday. Centaur roller derby Tuesday nights. Zombie paintball every second Friday. Unicorn jousting at Christmas. And dragon riding tournament in June. Morgan's head was spinning. She heard stories about a small centaur population in the Far East Sang, and she knew there were dragons in the wild, but they were incredibly dangerous. Who would think of riding one? And trolls, zombies, unicorns? It was hard to tell whether Jupiter was serious. They turned into a street called Caddis Fly Alley, flattened out, sprinting now down the twisting maze-like back street. Morgan thought it would never end, but at last they stopped outside a curved wooden door with a small sign reading Hotel Decalion in faded gold lettering. You live in a hotel? Morgan puffed, but Jupiter didn't hear her. He was fumbling with a brass ring of keys when the door flew open and Morgan nearly fell over backwards. Looming in the doorway was a cat. Not just a cat. A giant cat. The biggest, scariest, toothless, shaggiest cat she had ever seen in her life. It sat back on its haunches and struggled to fit into the frame. Its face was squashed and wrinkled, as though it had run into a wall. It, and it snuffled and fuffled just like a huge prehistoric version of the kitchen cats at Crow Manor. If she'd been shocked by its appearance, that was nothing to show how Morgan felt when it turned its enormous gray head towards Jupiter and spoke. "I see you've brought my breakfast." Oh my gosh. I think you can see a picture of that cat on the cover. So anyway, I will read more tomorrow, and yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this. Let me know in the comments what you think or shoot me an email. Bye.